The morning mist clung to Liberty Park like a ghost refusing to leave, and Captain Alexia Vixen Restrepo's running shoes struck the asphalt in perfect rhythm. 3 miles down, 2 to go. Her breath formed small clouds in the October air as she rounded the lake, earbuds playing the same playlist that had carried her through 100 combat missions over Afghanistan's unforgiving terrain. The familiar burn in her calves felt good, real, tangible, nothing like the phantom weight of a flight stick that still haunted her dreams 6 months after her medical discharge. She'd been running this same route every morning since moving to Denver, trying to outpace the memory of her last mission, the one that ended with shrapnel in her left eye and a medical board declaring her unfit for active duty, the one that made her a statistic instead of a pilot, the one that Captain Restrepo. The voice cut through Metallica's guitar solo like a blade through silk. Vixen pulled out her earbuds, her body automatically shifting into a defensive stance she'd learned in survival school 15 years ago. Two men in Army combat uniforms emerged from behind the maintenance shed, their Ranger tabs catching the weak sunlight. The taller one, a Hispanic sergeant with calculating eyes, held up his hands in a peaceful gesture that fooled exactly no one. "Easy, Captain. We're not here to cause trouble." "Then why are you here?" Her voice carried the edge that had once made Taliban fighters think twice about engaging her A-10 Thunderbolt. "And how do you know my name?" The second man, pale and nervous, glanced at his partner before speaking. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us. There's been a situation." Vixen's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "A situation? Gentlemen, I'm medically retired. Whatever situation you're dealing with, the Air Force has plenty of active pilots who can handle it." The Hispanic sergeant stepped forward, his expression grave. "Not like this one, Captain. Not with your particular skill set." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of classified information. "We have a stolen F-22 Raptor somewhere over the Rocky Mountains, and the pilot's call sign is Spectre. Ring any bells?" The world seemed to stop. Cars continued driving past on Spear Boulevard. A jogger with a golden retriever trotted by, oblivious to the conversation that was about to change everything. But for Vixen, time crystallized into a single, terrible moment of recognition. Spectre, the ghost pilot, her former wingman, the man she'd trusted with her life over the skis of Kandahar, the man who disappeared 3 years ago during a classified mission that officially never happened, the man she'd loved. Her medical discharge suddenly felt like a cruel joke because Marcus Spectre Williams was alive, he was flying again, and somehow he'd stolen the most advanced fighter jet in the world. The morning mist seemed thicker now, pressing against her skin like a premonition. Whatever came next, she knew with bone-deep certainty that her quiet retirement was over. The Pale Ranger was speaking into his radio, using codes she recognized from her intelligence briefings. Priority Alpha, immediate extraction, package secured. She wasn't a person anymore, she was an asset being activated. "Captain," the Hispanic sergeant said, his tone shifting to something resembling respect, "we have a car waiting." Vixen looked back at the jogging path that had been her sanctuary, then at the two rangers who just shattered her carefully constructed new life. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. It never had been, not when Spectre was involved. "Lead the way," she said, and followed them toward whatever hell was waiting. The black SUV that waited in the parking lot had government plates and tinted windows dark enough to hide classified conversations. As Vixen climbed into the back seat, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window, a woman in running clothes and old sneakers, being recruited for what sounded like the most dangerous mission of her career. The irony wasn't lost on her. Colonel James Hartford was already inside, his weathered face mapping 40 years of military service. His Silver Star ribbon caught her attention first, followed by the combat action badge that meant he'd been shot at and lived to talk about it. When he spoke, His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Captain Restrepo, thank you for coming. Did I have a choice, sir?" His smile was thin as paper. "There's always a choice, but some choices have consequences we can't live with." He opened a tablet and showed her satellite imagery, thermal signatures over mountainous terrain, flight patterns that made her pilot's brain automatically calculate vectors and fuel consumption. At 3:47 this morning, Major Marcus Williams departed Nellis Air Force Base in an F-22A Raptor. Unauthorized departure. The aircraft is currently flying a search pattern over the Colorado Rockies, and he's not responding to any communication attempts. Vixen studied the images, her trained eye catching details that would escape civilian observers. The flight pattern wasn't random, it was systematic, methodical, the kind of search grid she'd flown dozens of times over hostile territory. He's looking for something. That's what we think too. Hartford swiped to the next image, showing a mountain valley that looked familiar in a way that made her stomach clench. The question is what, and why he's willing to risk a court-martial and 20 years in Leavenworth to find it. The SUV was moving now, heading toward what she assumed was Peterson Air Force Base. Through the bulletproof glass, Denver's skyline looked deceptively peaceful. Normal people were starting their normal days, unaware that somewhere above the mountains, a stolen fighter jet was flying patterns that could mean anything from a rogue pilot's breakdown to a national security threat. "Why me?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Because you know him better than anyone," Hartford replied. "You flew with him for 3 tours. You were his wingman on Operation Ghostlight, and according to your service record, you're one of only 12 pilots who have successfully talked down a hostile aircraft without engaging weapons." Operation Ghostlight, the mission that officially didn't exist, the one where they'd found something in the Hindu Kush mountains that the intelligence community had spent 3 years trying to forget. She'd assumed Marcus had died that night when his aircraft went dark over the Pakistani border. She'd mourned him, blamed herself, and eventually learned to live with the guilt. Now he was alive, flying stolen government property, and searching Colorado's mountains for something important enough to throw away everything he'd worked for. Hartford continued briefing her on technical specifications she already knew by heart. The F-22's stealth capabilities, its weapons systems, the classified countermeasures that made it nearly impossible to track. But Vixen's mind was elsewhere, remembering the last conversation she'd had with Marcus before that final mission. "Promise me something," he'd said, standing beside his aircraft in the pre-dawn darkness of Bagram Air Base. "If something happens to me out there if I don't come back, don't let them bury the truth." She'd laughed and told him nothing would happen, that they'd both be back for the poker game that night. She'd been wrong about everything. The SUV was slowing now, approaching the main gate of Peterson Air Force Base. Security personnel in digital camouflage checked their credentials with the thorough efficiency of people who took their jobs seriously. Beyond the fence, she could see F-16s on the tarmac, their canopies reflecting the morning sun like faceted jewels. "One more thing, Captain," Hartford said as they drove toward the command center. "Williams isn't just flying any F-22. He's flying tail number 54086, the aircraft he was supposed to die in 3 years ago." The pieces clicked together with the mechanical precision of a weapon being loaded. Marcus hadn't stolen a random fighter jet. He'd taken back his own aircraft, the one the Air Force had told her was destroyed in a classified incident over Pakistan. Everything she'd been told about that night was a lie. The command center buzzed with controlled urgency. Radar operators monitored multiple screens showing airspace over the Rocky Mountain region. Communications specialists attempted contact on every frequency Marcus might be monitoring. Intelligence analysts pored over satellite imagery, looking for clues about his destination. And at the center of it all stood General Patricia Blackwood, a woman whose reputation preceded her like artillery fire. 3 stars on her collar, combat pilot badge on her chest, and eyes that had seen enough war to know the difference between necessary sacrifice and pointless heroics. "Captain Restrepo," she said without looking up from the radar display, "your former wingman has given us quite a problem." "Yes, ma'am." 47 minutes ago, he deviated from his search pattern and began heading toward the Wyoming border. If he crosses into civilian airspace with a full weapons load, I'll have no choice but to authorize intercept. Blackwood finally turned to face her, and Vixen saw something unexpected in those steel-gray eyes: uncertainty. "I need you to talk him down before that becomes necessary." The weight of the moment settled on Vixen's shoulders like combat gear. She was being asked to save the life of a man she'd loved, a man she'd mourned, a man who'd apparently been alive for 3 years while she struggled with survivor's guilt. The irony of her medical discharge, ruled unfit for flight duty due to partial vision loss, seemed particularly cruel now. "General, with respect, I'm not current on communications protocols. It's been 6 months since your discharge, I'm aware." Blackwood's expression softened slightly. "Captain, do you know why you're really here?" Vixen felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. "Because I know Marcus better than anyone else." "That's part of it. But the main reason is that 3 years ago, you and Major Williams discovered something that certain people wanted to stay buried. Something important enough that they faked his death to keep it quiet." The general's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "He's not having a breakdown, Captain. He's trying to finish the mission you started together." The command center seemed to recede around them as the implications crashed over her like a tidal wave. Operation Ghostlight hadn't ended with Marcus's death. It had been terminated when someone decided the truth was too dangerous to reveal. And now he was back, flying alone toward whatever they'd found in those mountains 3 years ago. "What did we find, General?" Blackwood's smile was sharp as a knife blade. "That's classified above your current pay grade, Captain. But if you're willing to accept a temporary reactivation of your flight status, I can change that." The offer hung in the air between them like smoke from a battlefield. Vixen thought about her morning jog, her quiet apartment, the civilian life she'd tried to build from the wreckage of her military career. Then she thought about Marcus, alone in that F-22, carrying the weight of a secret that someone had been willing to kill for. "What are my orders, General?" A communications specialist looked up from his console, his face pale. "General Blackwood, we've re-established contact with the Raptor. The pilot is requesting to speak with Vixen." The call sign hit her like a physical blow. Marcus knew she was here. Somehow, impossibly, he knew the Air Force had brought her back, which meant this wasn't a rogue operation, it was an invitation. Blackwood handed her a headset, and suddenly Vixen was back in the world she'd never really left. The weight of the equipment felt familiar, comforting, like putting on an old uniform that still fit perfectly. Around her, the command center had gone quiet, every person focused on the conversation about to take place. "Spectre, this is Vixen. How do you read?" Static crackled for 3 heartbeats, and then his voice filled the channel, older, wearier, but unmistakably Marcus. "Vixen, Jesus Christ, they actually brought you back." "Where are you, Marcus?" She kept her voice steady, professional, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "Half the Air Force is looking for you." "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The question is whether you're ready to hear the truth about what we found out there." General Blackwood was making hand signals, instructing her to keep him talking, to determine his location and intentions. But Vixen found herself caught between loyalties, to the Air Force that had discharged her, to the mission she'd never understood, and to the man whose voice was carrying ghosts across the radio waves. "The truth about what, Spectre?" "About why they told you I was dead, about what we actually found in that cave, about why someone was willing to sacrifice an entire squadron to keep it quiet." His voice carried the weight of 3 years' worth of secrets. "Vixen, remember what I told you the night before Ghostlight. about not letting them bury the truth. She remembered, standing beside his aircraft, promising something she hadn't understood until this moment. I remember. Then meet me at the coordinates we discussed that night. Come alone, and Vixen. His voice softened, carrying echoes of conversations they'd had in quieter times. Bring your flight gear. The transmission ended, leaving the command center in absolute silence. Every eye was on her, waiting for an explanation of coordinates she'd never discussed, a meeting she'd never arranged. But the truth was simpler and more complex than anyone in that room could imagine. Marcus hadn't just stolen an F-22, he'd stolen it to come back for her. General Blackwood's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Captain, what coordinates? Vixen closed her eyes, remembering that last night at Bagram. They'd been looking at star charts, planning navigation routes for the next day's mission. Marcus had pointed to a specific valley in the Colorado Rockies, joking about how similar the terrain looked to their target area. If we ever get out of this war, he'd said, remind me to take you camping there. She'd laughed and promised to hold him to it. Devil's Canyon, Colorado, she said. Grid reference 40782967. The intelligence analysts were already pulling up satellite imagery of the location. A remote valley 50 miles northwest of Colorado Springs, accessible only by mountain roads that turned into hiking trails. No structures, no strategic value, nothing that would explain why a pilot would risk everything to reach it. Unless that pilot knew something the satellites couldn't see. Hartford leaned over the radar display, studying the F-22's current position. He's already heading there, ETA approximately 47 minutes. He looked up at Blackwood. General, if we're going to intercept. We're not intercepting, Blackwood interrupted. We're following Captain Restrepo's recommendation. She turned to Vixen with an expression that mixed respect and calculation. You said he's not having a breakdown. Prove it. The weight of command settled on Vixen's shoulders like body armor. She was being given authority she hadn't held in 6 months, responsibility for a situation that could end in court-martial or combat. Around her, the command center waited for orders that would determine whether Marcus Williams lived or died. I need a helicopter and a pilot willing to fly into unmarked airspace, she said. And I need someone to explain what we actually found in that cave 3 years ago. Blackwood's smile was thin as wire. The helicopter I can arrange. The explanation will have to wait until we're certain about Major Williams' intentions. But Vixen was already moving, muscle memory taking over as she headed toward the equipment lockers. She'd spent 6 months trying to forget how to be a combat pilot. It took less than 6 minutes to remember. The US-60 Black Hawk lifted off from Peterson Air Force Base at 11:47 hours, carrying a crew of 4 and 1 medically discharged Air Force captain who wasn't supposed to be there. Chief Warrant Officer Maria Santos handled the controls with the steady competence of someone who'd flown similar missions over Afghanistan, Iraq, and places that didn't appear on official maps. Captain, Santos said over the intercom as they banked toward the mountains, you mind telling me why we're chasing a stolen F-22 into the middle of nowhere? Through the helicopter's windows, Vixen could see the Rocky Mountains rising ahead of them like a wall of stone and snow. Somewhere among those peaks, Marcus was flying alone toward answers she wasn't sure she wanted to hear. Because 3 years ago, my wingman and I found something that someone wanted to stay lost, she replied. And now he's trying to finish what we started. The Black Hawk's engines settled into a steady rhythm as they climbed toward Devil's Canyon. Behind them, Peterson Air Force Base shrank to a collection of geometric shapes against the Colorado plains. Ahead lay mountains, mysteries, and the possibility that everything she'd believed about Marcus's death had been a carefully constructed lie. Vixen, this is Spectre, UN route. His voice filled her headset again, closer now, carrying undertones she recognized from their combat missions together. Marcus was scared, but not of dying. He was scared of being wrong about something that mattered more than his life. En route to your position, Spectre ETA 23 minutes. Good, because I found what we were looking for, and it's bigger than we thought. The transmission ended, leaving Vixen staring at mountain peaks that suddenly looked less like wilderness and more like a battlefield waiting to be revealed. Chief Santos adjusted their heading, following GPS coordinates toward a valley that existed on maps but had never appeared in any military database. The autumn landscape rolled beneath them, aspen trees showing gold against dark pine, meadows already touched by frost, streams running silver in the afternoon light. It looked peaceful, it looked innocent. It looked exactly like the kind of place where secrets went to die. Devil's Canyon opened before them like a scar in the earth, its walls rising nearly vertical on both sides. At the canyon's mouth, Chief Santos brought the Black Hawk into a hover, studying the terrain with professional caution. "Ma'am, I don't see anywhere to land in there. And if that F-22 is hiding in the canyon, my rotor wash might." There, Vixen pointed to a meadow perhaps a quarter-mile from the canyon entrance. "Put us down there, we'll walk in." As the helicopter settled onto the grass, Vixen could see tire tracks in the mud, recent ones, made by vehicles that had no business being in such a remote location. The tracks led toward the canyon, disappearing into shadows that seemed deeper than the afternoon sun should allow. "Chief, keep the engine spooled. We may need to leave quickly." Santos nodded, her hands steady on the controls. "How quickly, ma'am?" Vixen checked her sidearm, tested her radio, and looked toward the canyon where Marcus was waiting with 3 years' worth of secrets. "That depends on what we find in there." The walk to Devil's Canyon took 12 minutes across terrain that wanted to turn ankles and catch equipment on hidden routes. Vixen moved with the careful precision of someone who'd learned that carelessness in remote locations could be fatal. Behind her, Sergeant First Class David Kim provided overwatch, his M4 carbine ready but not obviously threatening. As they approached the canyon entrance, she could hear it, the distinctive whine of an F-22's engine spooled down but still running. Marcus was here, somewhere in the shadows ahead, waiting in an aircraft worth more than most people's houses. "Spectre, this is Vixen. I'm at the canyon entrance." "Copy, Vixen. Follow the sound of the engines. And watch your step. The ground isn't as stable as it looks." The canyon walls rose around them like cathedral spires, blocking out most of the sky and creating acoustic effects that made every footstep echo. 50 yards in, they found the F-22. It sat in a natural clearing, its angular stealth profile looking alien against the organic curves of wind-carved stone. The canopy was open, and Marcus Williams stood beside the aircraft in full flight gear, looking exactly like the pilot she remembered except for 3 years' worth of lines around his eyes. "Hello, Lex," he said, using the nickname only her closest friends knew. "Thanks for coming." The casual greeting hit her harder than any dramatic reunion could have. This was Marcus as she remembered him, calm, competent, and carrying the weight of impossible missions with grace that made other pilots jealous. Seeing him alive, breathing, standing there like the intervening years had been a minor inconvenience, made her want to simultaneously hug him and hit him. "Marcus," she kept her voice steady, professional, "you've caused quite a stir." His smile was rueful. "That was the idea, though I was hoping they'd send someone with more authority and fewer questions. They sent the person who knows you best, which means I know when you're lying." The smile faded. "I'm not lying, Lex. I'm just not telling the whole truth yet." He gestured toward the canyon wall behind his aircraft, where she could now see an opening that had been hidden by shadows and clever camouflage. "Want to see what we actually found that night in Afghanistan?" The cave entrance was larger than it appeared from a distance, easily big enough for a small team to enter without difficulty. But it was what lay beyond the entrance that made Vixen's breath catch in her throat. The walls were covered in symbols, not carved, but somehow burned into the stone itself. They pulsed with faint light that her medical records said she shouldn't be able to see with her damaged left eye. The symbols seemed familiar in a way that made her brain itch, as if she'd seen them before in dreams she couldn't quite remember. Jesus Christ, Marcus, what is this place? It's why they told you I was dead, he replied, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. It's why Operation Ghostlight was classified beyond black, and it's why we're about to have company that won't be nearly as friendly as Sergeant Kim. As if summoned by his words, her radio crackled with General Blackwood's voice. Vixen, we have multiple aircraft inbound on your position. Military transponders, but not ours. ETA 15 minutes. Marcus was already moving, heading deeper into the cave with the purposeful stride of someone following a familiar route. Come on, Lex. Time for you to see what you've been fighting for all these years. The deeper passages opened into chambers that defied geological explanation. The walls were smooth as glass, covered in more of the pulsing symbols that seemed to react to their presence. But it was the chamber at the cave's heart that made Vixen understand why someone had been willing to fake a pilot's death to keep this place secret. In the center of the room stood what could only be described as a machine, though its design followed no human engineering principles. It was approximately 12 feet tall, roughly cylindrical, and covered in the same symbols that adorned the walls. As they approached, it began to emit a low harmonic that seemed to resonate in her bones. We found one just like this in the Hindu Kush, Marcus said quietly, buried in a cave system that the locals said had been sealed for centuries. When we tried to study it to understand what it was, people started disappearing. First the research team, then their security detail, then anyone who'd been briefed on the discovery. The machine's humming grew louder, and the symbols began pulsing in synchronized patterns that reminded her uncomfortably of breathing. What does it do? That's what we were trying to figure out when they decided the whole operation was too dangerous to continue. Marcus's voice carried 3 years of frustration and fear. But I think I know now. I think these things are some kind of communication device, and I think someone's been using them to coordinate attacks on our forces. The implications hit her like a physical blow. If Marcus was right, if these machines were somehow connected to enemy operations, then the military's decision to classify the discovery made perfect sense. But it also meant that the war she'd fought, the missions she'd flown, the friends she'd lost, all of it might have been orchestrated by someone with access to technology that shouldn't exist. Marcus, we need to get out of here, now. But even as she said it, she could hear the sound of aircraft overhead. Multiple engines, military jets, coming in fast and low. Through the cave entrance, she could see shadows crossing the canyon walls as fighters took up positions above their location. Too late, Marcus said grimly. They found us. The radio crackled with a voice she didn't recognize, cold, professional, carrying the authority of classified operations. This is Colonel Morrison, 24th Special Operations Wing. You are in violation of restricted airspace. Exit the canyon immediately with your hands visible. Morrison. The name triggered a memory from her intelligence briefings. A special operations officer with connections to projects that didn't officially exist. The kind of man who made problems disappear permanently. Vixen, this is Blackwood. Do not comply with Colonel Morrison's instructions. Maintain your position until our assets arrive. 2 different colonels, 2 different orders, and she was caught in the middle with a stolen F-22 and a discovery that someone was willing to kill for. The situation was spiraling beyond anyone's control, and she could feel the weight of decisions that would affect far more than her own survival. Marcus, how do we get out of here? His smile was grim as winter. We don't, but maybe we can make sure the truth gets out before they stop us. He activated a recording device she hadn't noticed before, its red light reflecting off the cave walls like a tiny star. This is Major Marcus Williams, call sign Spectre, making what will probably be my final transmission. If you're hearing this, then the people responsible for Operation Ghostlight's termination have found us, and we're likely dead. The machine in the chamber's center began humming louder, its cymbals pulsing faster, as if responding to the increased tension. Whatever it was, whatever purpose it served, it was definitely not human in origin. And the fact that identical devices had been found in Afghanistan suggested a pattern that extended far beyond a single discovery. Lex, Marcus said quietly, there's something else you need to know, something about your medical discharge. The world seemed to stop. What about it? The shrapnel that damaged your eye, it wasn't from an enemy weapon. It was from our own aircraft, from a deliberate targeting system malfunction. Someone wanted you out of the Air Force before you could piece together what we'd found. The betrayal hit her like a punch to the chest. Her medical discharge, the end of her flying career, the survivor's guilt that had haunted her for 6 months, all of it had been orchestrated by someone who saw her as a threat to whatever operation they were protecting. Who? The word came out as a whisper. I don't know for certain, but Colonel Morrison was the intelligence liaison for Operation Ghostlight. He had access to flight systems, personnel records, medical boards. Marcus's voice carried the weight of 3 years' worth of investigation. I think he's been cleaning up loose ends ever since. Outside, the sound of aircraft engines was growing louder. Through the cave entrance, she could see military vehicles positioning themselves around the canyon rim. They were surrounded, outgunned, and running out of time to escape with evidence that could change everything. But as Vixen looked at the alien machine pulsing with inexplicable energy, she realized that escape might not be the point. Some truths were worth dying for, especially when the alternative was letting them remain buried forever. Marcus, can you get your F-22 airborne? Maybe, but they'll shoot me down before I clear the canyon. Not if I'm flying wingman. The look he gave her was equal parts hope and disbelief. Lex, you're medically discharged. You can't fly military aircraft. Watch me. The sound of boots on stone echoed through the cave as armed figures moved toward their position. Morrison's people, come to clean up the loose ends that Marcus and she represented. In moments, they'd be captured or killed, and the truth about Operation Ghostlight would die with them. Unless they could get airborne first. The F-22 is a single-seat aircraft, Marcus pointed out as they moved toward the cave entrance. Then I'll have to find something else to fly. Vixen keyed her radio, hopping. General Blackwood was still listening. Blackwood, this is Vixen. I need immediate air support at my position. Vixen, what's your situation? I'm about to attempt something that's either brilliant or suicidal, possibly both. The first figures in tactical gear appeared at the cave entrance, their weapons raised and ready. Behind them, more soldiers moved into position, creating a perimeter that would be impossible to break through on foot. But they weren't planning to walk out. Marcus was already sprinting toward his F-22, its engines spooling up with the distinctive whine of an aircraft preparing for immediate takeoff. The canyon floor vibrated under the increasing thrust, and loose stones began falling from the walls as acoustic energy reflected off the enclosed space. Spectre, you are ordered to shut down your aircraft immediately, Morrison's voice boomed across the canyon from external speakers. Any attempt to take off will be considered a hostile act. Marcus's response came over the radio as his canopy closed. Colonel, with all due respect, go to hell. The F-22 began moving, slowly at first as Marcus tested the aircraft's response on the uneven canyon floor. The Raptor wasn't designed for operations in such confined spaces, but Marcus had always been the kind of pilot who could make impossible situations work through skill and determination. Vixen ran toward the canyon entrance, where Chief Santos was hovering the Black Hawk just outside the narrowest section. The helicopter's door gunner was tracking multiple targets, his weapon trained on soldiers who were trying to establish firing positions without hitting the stolen F-22. "Chief, I need you to follow that Raptor out of the canyon," she said as she climbed aboard. "Ma'am, with respect, that's impossible. The canyon's too narrow for both aircraft, and if he goes to afterburner, then we'll have to be creative." Behind them, Marcus's F-22 reached takeoff speed and lifted from the canyon floor with the grace of a bird freed from a cage. The aircraft's stealth profile looked even more otherworldly in the confined space, its angular surfaces reflecting canyon walls in strange geometric patterns. But freedom was still 50 yards of narrow canyon away, and Morrison's people weren't planning to let them reach open sky. "All units weapons free," Morrison's voice crackled across military frequencies. "Take them down." The first missile streaked past the Black Hawk's rotor disc close enough that Vixen could feel its heat wash. Chief Santos threw the helicopter into evasive maneuvers that tested the airframe's limits, weaving between canyon walls while trying to maintain enough altitude to avoid ground fire. Ahead of them, Marcus's F-22 was accelerating toward the canyon mouth, but anti-aircraft missiles were already in the air. The Raptor's stealth technology was useless at such close range, and Morrison's people had positioned their weapons specifically to deny escape routes. "Spectre, you have missiles inbound from multiple vectors," Vixen called over the radio. "Copy, Vixen, beginning evasive maneuvers." What followed was a display of piloting skill that reminded Vixen why Marcus had been selected for the most dangerous missions of the Afghan War. The F-22 twisted through three-dimensional space in ways that seemed to violate physics, using the canyon walls as cover while maintaining just enough speed to stay airborne. But even the best pilot couldn't evade missiles forever in such a confined space. The first hit came from a shoulder-fired surface-to-air missile that caught the Raptor's left wing. Damage alarms filled the radio channel as Marcus fought to maintain control of an aircraft that was suddenly trying to auger into the canyon floor. "Spectre, what's your status?" "I'm flying, but not for long. Left wing's compromised, hydraulics are failing, and I'm losing engine power." His voice remained steady despite circumstances that would have panicked most pilots. "Vixen, I need you to do something for me." The Black Hawk cleared the canyon mouth just as two more missiles detonated behind them, filling the air with debris and smoke. Through the chaos, she could see the F-22 limping through the sky on reduced power, trailing vapor that meant critical systems were failing. "What do you need?" "The recording I made in the cave. It's uploading to a secure server, but it needs 12 more minutes to complete the transmission. I need you to buy me that time." 12 minutes was an eternity in aerial combat, especially when flying a damaged aircraft against fresh interceptors that were already taking position for attack runs. But as Vixen looked at the recording device Marcus had activated, she realized it contained the only proof that Operation Ghostlight had discovered something worth killing for. "Chief, can this helicopter keep up with that F-22? Santos checked her instruments, calculating speed and fuel consumption against the tactical situation developing around them. "For 12 minutes, maybe, but we're not armed for air-to-air combat." "Then we'll have to be creative." The next few minutes unfolded like a deadly aerial ballet. Marcus flew his damaged Raptor in slow circles above the Colorado mountains, using terrain masking and what remained of his aircraft's stealth capabilities to avoid missile locks. The Black Hawk stayed close, its crew scanning for threats while Vixen coordinated with General Blackwood's incoming support aircraft. But Morrison's interceptors were closing fast, and time was running out. "Vixen, this is Blackwood. We have F-16s en route, but they're still 8 minutes out." 8 minutes? 4 minutes longer than Marcus could realistically keep his damaged aircraft airborne. "General, we need those fighters now." "Captain, they're pushing their engines beyond redline already. There's nothing more we can do." Vixen watched Marcus's F-22 struggle through another evasive turn, its damaged wing leaving a vapor trail that marked its position for anyone with eyes to see. In 4 minutes, maybe less, Morrison's interceptors would achieve firing position and end this chase permanently. Unless she could think of something that would give them the time they needed. "Chief, how much ordnance are we carrying?" "Just what the door gunner has, ma'am. Why?" Vixen studied the approaching interceptors, calculating vectors and timing with the precision that had made her one of the Air Force's most effective combat pilots. It was a desperate plan, built